Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to New York Times reporter Charles Duhigg. For the past several months, he has been working on a series titled Toxic Waters, examining the worsening pollution in the nation's water systems. Charles Duhigg joined us last month to discuss how chemical companies have violated the Clean Water Act more than 500,000 times in the last 5 years. Most of the violations have gone unpunished, with state regulators taking significant action in just 3% of all cases. Since then, he has written articles focusing on how coal-fired power plants and large farms are threatening the nation's drinking water. The Times revealed that 313 coal-fired power plants have violated the Clean Water Act since 2004, but 90% of those plants were not fined or otherwise sanctioned. No federal regulations specifically govern the disposal of power plant discharges into waterways or landfills.
As for farms, runoff from all but the largest farms is essentially unregulated under the Clean Water Act. Agricultural runoff is the single largest source of water pollution in the nation's rivers and streams. Nearly 20 million Americans fall ill each year from waterborne parasites, viruses, or bacteria, including those stemming from human and animal waste. Well, Charles Duhigg of the New York Times joins us here in our Firehouse studio. We welcome you to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much for
Your
having me.
articles are also supported by an editorial today in the New York Times about the significance of the 1972 Clean Water Act, how it has to be improved, and the significance of your pieces. Start off by talking about Allegheny Energy, the coal-fired plant in Masontown, Pennsylvania.
This is one of the largest and for a long time one of the dirtiest coal-fired power plants in the United States. And over the last couple of years, we've made great advances in how we clean air pollution. So Allegheny, this plant, which is called Hatfield's Ferry, as well as a number of other plants across the nation, have installed these things called scrubbers. And what scrubbers are is it's basically they spray water and chemicals through the chimneys and take out a lot of the air pollution before it escapes into the sky. The problem is that when you spray that stuff in there and sort of the water and the pollution collects at the bottom, you have to do something with it. And what we found is that increasingly that pollution and waste is being dumped into nearby rivers and lakes, or is being put into large ponds or landfills where it can also seep through the ground into drinking water supplies. So what the concern is that we're moving pollution perhaps just from the air to the water, and we're not really solving the problem as robustly as the nation should.
But then in terms of being able to regulate these plants in terms of water discharges, what has the federal government done?
Well, the federal government, there are solutions out there. There's systems called zero discharge emission systems that would prevent any pollution from making it into the water or the air. But the federal government has not created any rules for power plants, and this has been a big issue. Way back in 2000, the EPA was poised and in fact had drafted a rule to specially regulate pollution, water pollution, other types of pollution from power plants. But the energy industry pushed back pretty significantly. That rule was shelved, and there's been no rules designed for power plants since then. Now, Lisa Jackson, who's the new head of the EPA under President Obama, has said that by the end of this year, she will issue new rules on water pollution from power plants, and that she's going to make a determination whether the waste that comes out of power plants should be considered hazardous waste. If it's considered hazardous waste, a whole new set of rules will be applied to it. But as for right now, there's no special rules for power plants.
You write that only 1 in 43 power plants across the nation must limit how much barium that they dump into nearby waterways. Talk about the significance of barium, and that 90% of hundreds of coal-fired power plants have violated the Clean Water Act and were not fined or otherwise sanctioned. But start with the barium.
That's exactly right. Barium is a chemical. The waste from power plants is essentially what is left over when you burn coal. And as we all know, coal is a relatively dirty mineral. It's very dense. When you burn it, a lot of bad stuff comes off, a lot of minerals, barium, arsenic, other minerals. Barium is one that the government has said causes health problems. It can affect your organs. It can cause skin rashes and other problems. Arsenic is another mineral that we see a lot in the byproduct, the waste from coal. Because the Clean Water Act doesn't say you must limit certain types of chemicals, a lot of power plants emit barium, arsenic, and other things, but there's no limit in the law on how much they can put out. And so as a result, they can essentially dump as much as they want into nearby rivers, and power plants are usually by rivers because they need a lot of water to produce energy. Now, the point that you raised is that a lot of regulators have tried to use the Clean Water Act to regulate and rein in the pollution, the water pollution that comes out of power plants. But the Clean Water Act, like any law, is only as good as you enforce it. And what we found by looking at our records, and we had built this big database, was that hundreds and hundreds of plants have violated their Clean Water Act permit and have never been punished for it. Or if they have been punished, they've been punished at the tune of a couple $1,000s or maybe $20,000, when these are firms that bring in billions of dollars in profits.
You mentioned arsenic, and in some cases you found in Ohio and North Carolina that there were releases of arsenic as much as 18 times above federal limits?
Well, actually, this comes from EPA data, and what they found was that near landfills where power plants have dumped the waste from generating electricity, arsenic has seeped into the groundwater. And you're exactly right. Sometimes the level of arsenic detected in the groundwater was 18 times higher than the federal limit. They said that for some populations, they were at an exposed cancer risk that was 2,000 times higher than what EPA says we should be exposed to.
That's an EPA report itself.
That's EPA data, right?
Says that people living near some power plant landfills have a 2,000 times higher rate of cancer.
Risk of cancer. Right.
Than federal health standards.
Right. This is a huge, and the reason why we wrote about power plants and why we're talking about power plants today is power plants are the single largest source of toxic pollution in the nation. When you think about it, it's kind of hard to believe because we assume that garbage or, sort of what comes out of our house, but it's actually power plants. They burn coal all day long. Coal has a lot of byproducts. So creating special rules for power plants would make sense because it is such a big source of toxic emissions, more than chemical plants, more than concrete plants, anything else.
And the power of the coal lobby?
The power of the coal lobby and the energy lobby is fairly significant. It's one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C. Now, that being said, it's important to always remember everything that we do in a large part is powered because of coal. America is the Saudi Arabia of coal. When we're able to plug in our BlackBerry and turn on the lights and not think about it, it's because we have so much coal and because we burn it. But there are very serious environmental byproducts from that, and if they're not regulated, people suffer. Another
issue that you've been touching on in your articles has been farming and the impact especially of factory farms on drinking water. You went to Morrison, Wisconsin,
right?
And where there's 41,000 dairy cows in Brown County, and you talked to Lisa Bernard, who says sometimes it smells like a barn coming out of the faucet.
Yeah.
What are these factory farms doing to the drinking water?
Well, one of the biggest these large farms, one of the biggest byproducts is cows produce a lot of manure, and particularly now because cows are fed high-protein grains, they produce liquid manure. You got to do something with this manure. You got to sweep it away and put it to dispose of it. And so what a lot of farmers do is they spray it on fields and they use it to grow corn that they feed to the cows, and so there's kind of a nice cycle there. But when you have so many cows producing so much manure, and each cow produces the amount of manure in a year equivalent to about 19 people. So in Brown County, which is a relatively sparsely populated county, they produce as much manure as a huge, huge city. They have to do something with it, and so they spray it on the ground. Some regulators there feel that they spray too much of it on the ground. The soil can only absorb so much of the manure, and so when the soil reaches capacity, the bacteria and the other bad stuff in the manure filters through into drinking water supplies, and then when people go to their wells, they drink water that smells like manure. There was one woman told me a story of she was giving her 6-month-old daughter a bath, and she only breastfed her. She didn't drink any water, but the infant sucked the dish rag that had bacteria in it and ended up being hospitalized. A field across the street had spread manure a couple days earlier. Particularly in winter months, Wisconsin is very cold. In winter months, the ground freezes. They have to continue applying the manure because they got to put it someplace. And then if there's an early thaw, it just can seep through the ground very, very quickly.
And you write that 19.5 million Americans fall ill each year as a result of the waterborne parasites, the viruses, the bacteria.
That was a study that was done that tried to estimate how many people become ill.
20 million people.
I mean, and when you think about it, most of us who do get sick, we probably don't realize it, right? You go out, you have an upset stomach for a couple days, and you say, oh, I must